Nicole Watson. I'm the gallery director here at St. Kate's, and I'm really pleased to welcome you to tonight's Artist Talk with Monica Rudquist. As you can see, we're seated in the exhibition that Monica both curated and made artwork for. This show is titled Reflections and Conversations, and it features Monica's functional and installation-based ceramics, as well as the paintings, prints, and drawings of her late father, Jerry Rudquist. I'd like to begin by recognizing that St. Catherine University is on the contemporary, traditional, and ancestral homelands of the Dakota people, specifically the Wahapakuti and the Oceti-Sakowin. The Dakota people are still here. They continue to live, love, and thrive on this land. We offer our honor and respect to the Dakota people and to this land that we now occupy. We also understand that acknowledgement is not enough, nor is it justice for the Dakota people. As Joseph M. Pierce, a scholar and citizen of the Cherokee Nation, explains, land is not asking for acknowledgement. It is asking to be returned to itself. It is asking to be heard and cared for and attended to. It is asking to be free. Land is a gift, a relative, a body that sustains other bodies. And if the land is our relative, then we cannot simply acknowledge it as land. We must understand what our responsibilities are to the land as our kin. To engage with the land on the land's terms is an act of reciprocity. Reciprocity rather than recognition is what the land requires, because that is what it has already given. Are you not alive, breathing, because of this land? Thank you. So before we begin, I'll give you just a little bit of information about our format. This is maybe a less traditional artist talk because Monica and I have chosen to be in conversation, which is nice. We've known each other a really long time. So this feels like kind of a gift to me that you're giving me here. But we'll be talking for about 45 to 50 minutes. And then we'll take some questions for about 20 minutes. The galleries will stay open until 8 o'clock, so I hope you'll stick around for a bit after the event, look at the show, and talk with Monica. Also, I just want to let you know that we have 2 videographers here tonight, and so they are here documenting the exhibition and the artist talk. Lisa in particular is recording the event, so if you know someone who couldn't make it tonight but really wanted to, we'll have the video up on our website hopefully in the next couple of weeks. So before we move on to our discussion, what I've asked Monica to do is to start by introducing herself and her dad.
Hi, everyone. I feel, for the most part, like I don't need to introduce myself because, however,
it's good for the students.
It's good, right. But first, thank you, Nicole. Yeah, we have been working very closely for the last
8 years?
8, yeah.
8 years.
Yeah, and sometimes so closely that we can, it seems like we
read
read each other's minds, right.
Yeah.
So Nicole has graciously allowed this artist talk to become a discussion so that I would be a little bit more comfortable, but everything. But my name is Monica Rudquist. I have a little bit of notes here. I'm a clay artist. I work primarily with porcelain. My father, Jerry Rudquist, was a painter, and some people called him a master with a brush. We both grew up in Minneapolis and discovered our love for art and making things at a very young age. My father attended Minneapolis College of Art and Design, that's MCAD, and I went to Macalester College. We both went to Cranbrook Academy of Art for graduate school, where we both met our spouses. And then we both brought them back here. My dad began teaching at Macalester right after graduate school, and stayed there for 42 years. Since graduate school, I have taught all ages and mediums at a variety of institutions, and for the last 17 years have been here at St. Kate's. My dad was represented by 2 galleries over his lifetime. The tiny Susie Cone Gallery over by Mac, and then Groveland after Susie's closed. I have never really been represented by a gallery, but have found a variety of ways to exhibit my work, including art fairs, invitationals, and juried exhibitions, and galleries like this. We both built our artistic practices here in Minnesota, and I think we both felt very much like this is our home. My father seemed to know everyone in the arts and beyond. We would go to Lund's and he would, everybody would know him. Early on, I joined WARM, the Women's Artist Registry of Minnesota, and was a founding member of Northern Clay Center. I'm currently co-president of Minnesota Women Ceramic Artists with that person in the back there, Kim Roth. My dad was my first mentor. Growing up surrounded by his artwork, I never really looked closely at it or considered if my own artwork might have some connection to it, because he was my dad. During my sabbatical in 2023, I had the opportunity to look at his work more closely and reflect on our lives as artists who teach and consider if there was a relationship between our art and this exhibition is the result. That's my introduction.
Yeah. That's a great segue. My first question is something that I most appreciate about working with you. All the exhibitions that we've ever done together have always been like your work in dialogue with someone else's work.
Yeah.
In my time here, you've always used both gallery spaces. That dialogue has taken a number of different forms. But this is particularly special in this case because it's your dad. Can you tell a bit about how that happened and why now? What discoveries have you made in this process of being in conversation, particular with his work?
I need to take a drink of water first. You would think that I wouldn't be nervous in this space. I've been here for quite a while. It is like home. And there's a nail on the floor. You'll find out the importance of that in a little bit. So first, to address the question about curating in dialogue with other artists. For me, I guess it's all about creating a context to see the work. It's about creating context with my peers or with my mentors. So because I think it's important to realize that, I'm not really working in a vacuum, right? None of us are. But I've been really blessed with having some wonderful mentors in my life, and they affect me all the time as I'm working. So, I started out with Gail Christensen, who taught at McAllister College when I was really little, so I started working with her when I was 13. And then with Ron Gallis, who really sent me down the road to making multiples and thinking about that. And then Judy Onofrio, who I was just really honored to be able to work with and to have the exhibition here. But, all of that sort of leads to sort of the idea of working together and seeing it in context, yeah. Mm-hmm. And my dad being basically my first mentor, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But the idea from the show, came during my sabbatical, and my sister and I had started going through his work again. He passed away in 2001, and we still have a storage space of his work.
How much work do you think you have?
Many, 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 many pieces.
I know Andrea's here from
Right,
Global
I know.
Gallery, so maybe we don't
So,
want
right,
to
right, I'm like, hey, you know.
doing an overwhelm her.
It's, yeah. We've, yeah.
A lot.
A lot of work. But it was during that time that I was able to really start looking. We were sorting through things. And then, you know, I was on sabbatical, so in my mind, I thought that I was going to, I was supposed to be working, like making things. As it turned out, it was really recovering from teaching through COVID, putting all my energies into figuring out how to do that. I'm looking at Carol there. We had many conversations like, how are we supposed to make a video, you know?
Yeah, you learned a whole new way of teaching during that time.
Right. So then I remember mentioning to you, or sort of maybe complaining, but that I haven't really done anything. You know, what am I going to do for my show? And you just planted the seed of like, well, have you ever considered that maybe there's some relationship between our work? Right, you know. So, yeah. So I think that you really gave me that permission to start to really look at his work, right? And maybe I was finally old enough to look at it and say, okay, you know, are there some similarities? You know, and yeah.
What did you notice?
First thing was that he worked in series. I was like, oh, yeah, okay, that's similar, right? You know, and then it's sort of different shapes and lines, right? And then have more introspective kinds of things, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say too, like even the reworking of shapes over and over again, right?
Right. Yeah, definitely. And I'm pointing over there because this is meaning like in the other gallery, in there's a print that has a section that's very much like in his notebooks. So he always carried a notebook with him, sketchbook, and he would do variations. You know, you open up a page and you would see in front of you probably 20 different variations of an image, kind of just the working through. And then I look around me here now and I'm like, yeah, okay, we've got some similarities there.
Yeah, I think you capture some of that too. If there's a few wall labels you'll notice that have basically scans from your dad's sketchbooks alongside photos of your studio process. So his documentation process or his ideation was really in those sketchbooks, but yours is really in your photographs.
It's really documenting the process.
The process of working. And seeing them side by side is pretty clear that you work in very similar ways. This constant sort of reworking and coming back to and trying new things and staying curious. Which is really hard to do as an artist, I think. Right? Those of you there's a lot of artists in this room.
There are.
That's can be really challenging. You mentioned the other gallery space, and that feels like kind of a good connecting point to my next question, which is about the distinct parts of this exhibition. So we're in the West Gallery space, right? There's this is one sort of installation perspective, but the other space is pretty distinct from this. How do you describe these two different gallery spaces? Like, how do you characterize them? What were you trying to do?
Well, going back to sort of how how the show came about, right? Looking through his work, being reminded about the work that he did, right? The work that's really important, and pulling out those things at the same time as looking to see, okay, what kinds of things struck me, you know, that reminded me of my work. And two things happened. I started to see pieces that sort of felt like they connected, between my work and his work. And that work is in the other gallery. And then there was this work of his, The Must We Always Expect War, paintings, 6 of which are here. There's a total, I think, of 12 in the full series. And then these are Warflower paintings here. And I thought, well, these have to be in the show, right? And because I think these are some of the latest pieces that he did in his life. But I had no clue as to what I was going to be able to have with this work, right? And so that was like, okay, they're going to be here. I can do this. So I went back and forth between the two things. I knew that I wanted both galleries to be different because I knew that we worked in a variety of different ways, right? We both work with pieces that are more intimate in scale, really are one-to-one, and then work that's more challenging, right, in different ways. And so I thought of the two spaces, and then we have to think about, there is this wonderful exhibition upstairs on the 2nd floor that my student Sophie Gibson over here, she's being put on spot, curated. So Sophie's been working with me since last spring, and Sophie's able to highlight some of the figurative work that my dad's done, right? So my dad was just, did all sorts of things. So that was really a wonderful way, an experience for Sophie for that, but to also sort of bring that part in. But it's really thinking like, how do I make this and keep this my show? Because that was really also clear. I was like, okay, I could easily have curated an exhibition of my dad's work, right? And, but I was also very clear. It's like, this is my show, and I'm working with you. And so there was this conversation, really, yeah. So I think that they're all parts to a whole. To get back to that.
Yeah. Well, I feel like, I mean, let's talk a little bit more about this gallery, because you mentioned your dad's 2 painting series. And it's hard to ignore their titles, which War Flowers and Must We Always Expect War. So it feels like there's a story there. And then we have Murmuration, right, which is your piece in this space. And so and it's your most recent work too, right?
Yes.
Up until
very recent, yes. Quite recent.
Quite recent.
Yes.
So how did Murmuration begin, and what were you thinking of? Can you tell us what these 2 painting series are about, and sort of how that fed into Murmuration?
Sure. So Must We Always Expect War? What we see here has all been done. I think the earliest one was done that we have here is from 1991. But the earliest, the very first piece that he did in that series was done in 1959 or 1958, and that was about the Korean War. And this early 19th, sorry, I'm going to just turn this off. You all see people doing that. Now I'm on. That he made right before my son Mars was born. And
what year was that?
He was born in 1992.
Okay.
Yeah. So it was right before. So I think this was the Iraq War.
Yeah.
There's a piece somewhere which we should have been able to copy or whatever, that that where my dad writes about this.
Mm-hmm.
But there's so many things that we didn't find that for this. But he talks about thinking about how his grandchildren and war. And that I think that's the piece that then started. And so then he did pieces connected to different countries and different wars. My dad, and then the war flowers are influenced by, I really couldn't tell you about the flower aspect of it. That part I'm not quite sure about, but I do know that on one of his sabbaticals, he went to Europe and went to war museums. And I remember when he came back and there were just pictures after pictures of all these different, helmets and war implements and all that. And he was just fascinated by the forms and the shapes. And I think forms and shapes, now you think, that's something that we both share. We'd like, but just sort of the reworking of those, these little paintings here. My sister and I really just discovered these. I do not remember seeing these paintings before last summer, right? And so, these pieces, are political, right? He's thinking about the time that he was living in. And at one point, that was part of why I really had no idea how I was going to be putting my work into this, because I don't really, my work is not political. My work is much more just formal, right? But at one point, a couple of things. I'm looking at my husband back there. He's listening, because he's not even going to remember this. But he said something to me. The last few years have been pretty tough, right? A lot of uncertainty, and this is when I was just not really getting into the studio. I hadn't really done any work for a while. And he said, well, you could do something political. I said, really? So that was just sort of this thing in the back of my head, right? And then last summer, when I started working, and I'm going to look at Carol right over there, because we had a picnic for the department at our house, and I brought everybody back, and I said, I think there's something, I'm starting to work, right? And it's the piece that's in the entryway there, the larger black cut piece. And when I made that piece, I saw in my head this piece here, the artillery flower. And it just started kind of went from there. I really think of that as more, I've always cut, well, I haven't always, but I've for a long time cut and reassembled, cut piece things together. But that piece in the hallway there felt to be more like fragments. And it was just like that, okay, yeah, that felt right, and fragments, things are kind of coming apart, right? And in my head, at first, I just felt like it was just this feeling of, how can I make something that really feels like it's coming apart, right? And then it just sort of started to go. And then it because my studio's not this big. I don't have this many walls, right? But I have 8-foot long table and so I could start to, and I don't really do a lot of sketching or anything. I mean, I knew the dimensions for this space, and then it, you know, so I did like one section. I actually started with this section here, and it just started to take off on its own, right? And it started to feel like a murmuration. And I don't know who exactly, Carol might say she was the one who looks like a murmuration. I'm going to put you on the spot. But murmurations kind of came into the picture, right? And I looked up the definition of murmuration, you know, a low sound, right? Or maybe a disturbance. You know, starlings go off. It's in flight, you know, from predator. And all of a sudden it just started, it's like, yeah, okay, murmuration, that makes sense, right? That's the very first time I've ever come up with sort of like a title before I've even really done a piece too. So this is a very different way that all of this came about.
Yeah, I remember talking about murmuration with you, and I think what's so incredible to me is that you really you sort of let your intuition drive the creation of the piece, which is, again, can be really hard to do. And I remember there were moments when you were like, what am I doing? Like, how am I going to get this done in time? And then there's just sort of it was around the election, things felt very chaotic sort of globally, but also I know that you've been thinking a lot about your upcoming retirement, right? Like things were shifting and changing. Right. But I think it's so amazing that you trusted your intuition to sort of see you through that process. And it's remarkable to me that although it's the piece sort of started with ideas of breaking apart in chaos, there's a movement here that's very cohesive.
Right. I mean, if anything, that's something that it is much more cohesive than I kind of initially envisioned it. You know, and once that idea of the murmuration sort of planted itself, that was a way to contain it. You know, and then it sort of it took off in that direction. And like I'm looking at this part of the wall here, that's the last part that I did, which is actually more like the parts they're all just parts, right? None of them are assembled, because initially I was really thinking about these. They're just going to be parts, and then somehow they didn't, right? Then they became these little kind of assemblages, which if I hadn't done that, it wouldn't have been so much work and it wouldn't have taken so much time. But I guess what I'm saying is like it's interesting because I do work very intuitively, and it took me a couple of things when you were talking about this, making me remember and thinking about all of this. This has been a real transition for me, a real transition piece for me, because I mean the piece itself pushed me just, you know, kind of physically and mentally every day. I mean, my family will tell you how much time and how occupied it was in order to get this done. Because once I had it in my head that I was going to do this, it's like I was going to do it, you know. Even though I kept telling myself, well, you know, if the kiln breaks, it will still be okay, you know, I still have this much, you know, because things happen with kilns, right? But, yeah, I forgot what other thing I was going to say there about that. But early on, when I was having kind of doubting how things were going to go, right? You really were the one that reminded me that I needed to just, just trust in yourself, right? Yeah. So which I think brings up the importance of having support, right? And it can be one word. I mean, it really is amazing, because this was a real good transition for me in that it put me back into the studio, right? I needed that transition from teaching to back in the studio, and this piece really did it, because I had to, right? But that word of encouragement, like, you can, just trust yourself, right? Because that, I think, is really what I didn't have the time to trust in myself. Right, in working, right.
And like everything else when you're in art, I mean, it's a practice, right? Trusting intuition, that's it's a practice. And if you get out of practice, it can be really hard to remember how to be in that place, which is uncomfortable when you don't know where something is going. It doesn't feel great.
Yeah.
But if you can kind of see it through and ride it out, something great can usually happen.
Yeah.
One of the things that you said about this piece when we were talking about it, and I loved it so much, so I just want to repeat it for everyone here, but you said, I wanted to make something that held your dad's work. I wanted to make something that held his work. What did you mean by that?
Held up to it. And I still don't exactly know what I mean by it, but there was a real feeling like I don't know how to put it into words. It's just that, not like cradle, well, I don't know how to, I do know that, I mean, there was a big piece of it too that I felt like I needed to make something that was worthy of it, in a way, but I also, holding it, I guess, his work is so poignant and so intense and so beautiful, but it's harsh, right? And I mean, it is related here. It might not sound like it, but I kind of wanted to have something that kind of would hold it and say that it's beautiful.
I think you accomplished that.
So, yeah.
We're going to get to audience questions in just a minute, but
Okay.
The one thing I want to make sure people understand is, in addition to being such a impressive artist, is that you are an impressive educator as well. And something else, I'm sure that this whole talk is just all the things that I admire about Monica, but it really is. But the way that you bring students into your practice, you always have students working on things with you, because I know that you see the opportunity for them, right?
Yeah.
And I would guess that it's more rewarding for you, right? But what do you think it means to be a teaching artist? I mean, knowing how your dad was a teaching artist and you are a teaching artist, what does it mean to you? What do you think it meant to your dad?
Well, I think for me, it means that I get to mentor somebody, work with them. I see that as working with them. I've always, even when I'm in a class, I'm working with my students. My assignments are always very open. So being able to share in the struggles, right? Because it's not easy for me, but it can be really fun to try things out and to test things out. and to talk through ideas and to know that there's support. I think a lot of that's because, I mean, of the support that I had in my mentors, right? And, you know, I think, and working alongside them, I think, you know, my dad had a studio at McAllister. The door, I mean, there, you know, he didn't work in, well, he worked in the studio during the summers when the students weren't there. He took over, he took over the studios. But his studio was right connected to the main studio. So it was right there, right? So I think that students knew that, right? They were very aware of his work, what he was working on, and that he was always there, right? You know, and so I think it's important for students to see that, you know. I don't think that you can't teach someone. You can tell somebody, right, that, well, you're gonna have to put a lot of time into it, you know. But if they see you doing it, then they know that you're not just saying it.
Right.
Right? Yeah. I mean, I always try to, you know, I hope that this is true. I think that I never have asked a student to do anything that I wouldn't do. Right? You know, and, but I think being a teaching artist is that kind of back and forth. Right?
Right. That continues even after students graduate, right?
Absolutely.
I mean,
you know,
we're still in touch with many alumni.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I just got a couple of messages for some that, yeah. And my dad, you know, was in touch with students his whole life.
Right.
Right. Right. You know, that's, it shifts, right? Yeah, the relationships just kind of grow. Yeah.
Yeah, and the community gets larger.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I tell my students, you know, I've always told them, you know, my door's always open, even if my door's not going to be here, you know. Yeah. Right. And I really mean it, right, you know.
Yes.
And some of them actually understand that. So, yeah. But
does anyone else have any questions for Monica?
Yeah.
As a teacher, do you find that the process of teaching and seeing what your students are working on and helping them problem solve stimulates your own creative juices?
Yeah, I think so, because I think if it didn't, that I mean, it's really kind of a selfish act for teaching, I think. It is, right? Because you don't have to do all the testing now. You know, they're doing some of the testing now. There again, you know, there's like, I'm looking at Sophia right there, and like there's like actual tests that you're doing, right? But the testing out of ideas, right? Yeah, you know, and like you see a flow. It doesn't mean that you're influenced and like, you know, it's the same idea, but just that energy, right? Yeah. So.
Monica,
Yeah.
thank you for this and for talking about your dad's work as well. You didn't touch on your process, and even though we all know.
Yes.
And we're here for you. Would you just talk a little bit about that?
So they all start out, all of these started out on a potter's wheel, right? And so I'm making, these are all started out as kind of, you know, little saucers. And so they're, you know, and then I'm cutting them and piecing them together. And to do something this large, or even something smaller that's going to be on the wall, which I've been doing for a while now, but I lay them out on Tyvek, which is house wrap, which this was my dad kind of inserting himself too. He left a roll of this white paper and in beautiful white big paper. You know, I was like, well, you're not going to draw on that. What did he use this for? Oh, look, I'm going to use it for my templates, which is great because Tyvek, you can put wet clay on top of it. You know, you can work directly on it. So I'm laying everything out. So I'm with these pieces, I'm through like maybe 10 pieces at a time, then kind of made the different parts, laid them out. I did a little bit of sketching kind of to get kind of a general flow, but then set the pieces down where I want to have them. Then I trace them onto the template, and then when they're stiff enough, then I number them, I number the paper, and then I drill a hole in the back of them, and then I label where the hole is on the piece of paper. And I'm looking at my son, who actually was the one that said, Mom, you need to come up with a system. And this was like, 12 years ago. So
it's very intentional then.
Oh, this is,
That was
yes.
not- I thought maybe you came in with pieces and randomly hung them. Wow.
That would be wow. Yes, yeah. No, so it's very intentional, but then I leave a lot of room for what would you call this? Tweaking. Right. So, like a kiln, when you fire a kiln, things don't always come out the way that you expect, right? If, things happen. When I lay things out for a template, where I feel like I'm being most free, which is when I feel like I'm kind of doing something where it's, I have to figure out the weight, the balance of each piece and how it's going to hang, right? And sometimes it works, and sometimes it's, a little bit different. And so I try to leave enough room in there to adjust. Sometimes it just, no, that doesn't work. That's not it. But, if the piece is telling me, no, I want to be this way instead of this way, I'll let that happen. Yeah.
Can I follow up on that?
Yeah.
You said on the Tyvek
Mhm.
that you can put wet pieces. So
Right.
I'm imagining, so each of the dishes,
Uh-huh.
you cut them. You don't make them and then go wham, make.
Right, right.
So you cut them while they're wet.
Yes.
So you're actually firing them and glazing them
Mm-hmm.
after they're already in.
In form, right.
Oh.
They are assembled beforehand, right. They're all cut, right.
Okay.
Right, because the edges they're not broken edges. They're all,
Yeah.
right, yeah.
Okay.
And how do you hang them on the wall?
Good question. It's very simple. I drill a hole at about a 45-degree angle, and then I have a headless brad, a nail, in the wall, so then the piece will hang flush against the wall. Right.
Is it like the one on the bookshelf?
That is exactly like the nail that's on the, yeah.
I had a question. I was
Yeah, Eva.
wondering, how these pieces will live after the exhibition, and if you ever envision them living apart from each other, or if they're all.
Mm-hmm.
Great question.
Yeah. Well, their next home is going to be in a box, multiple boxes. And then we'll see. I think that what I've learned is that you make stuff and then there's a life to them, right? And things happen. The only other piece that I made that was large was 22 feet long originally by 8 feet tall, and that was at Northern Clay Center. So that was about, when was that? 12 years ago? 2014, right. That was at Northern Clay Center, and then a couple months after we took it down, I was contacted by someone who said, you know, I saw some work and we have this, and so, and now it is in Life Source in Minnesota, and they see, which is an organization that facilitates organ and tissue transplants, and they saw their mission in that piece. And so who knows? You never know, right? But do I see it, you know, it's probably never going to be in the same configuration because the gallery is this size. You know, I think it's a piece that could be flexible enough to fit in a different type of space.
Do you number them or keep track?
They are all numbered. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So you were saying that this is a new way of working for you, or a new
Yeah.
kind of going in a new direction.
Yeah.
Are you going to keep going this way?
I don't know. That's, interesting. Yeah, right. I mean, I don't know, you know?
Can I follow up on that question?
Yeah.
So when I look at this work and I imagine you trying to come up with the concepts and looking at the final work, and when I look at this piece, I think of it as embracing your knowledge.
Uh-huh.
But I found it interesting when you started with the word murmuration, right? And then you built off of that for this piece. Do you think that particular element helped you? I found it hard to actually move from a concept into actualization. Do you
Right.
think that particular element helped you in developing this particular piece?
I think that, so the word came after a large portion of it had already been made, right? So I think the word, though, did help me to envision how it was going to kind of continue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you
So,
think that technique or that kind of concept is a catalyst you might use for future work? Or, I'm just trying to
Right.
grasp it, because it's different
Right.
being a teacher,
Right.
a professor, a mentor, to help somebody else develop their concepts.
right,
But coming up with your own concepts is often a world apart. You know?
right, yeah. I don't, because that is a very different way, right, from the way that I have worked. And I don't know. Yeah.
I guess I'm wondering, to follow up, was there something particular in this process that you think you can build or that you will use in your future work to build on?
Well, I'll tell you, I mean, one of the things that as I was working on this, I started seeing each section in my mind is very different, right? So there are sections where and the forms are different, right? What I was sort of playing with was different. Like there's areas above you where I was using really just sort of the center strips of them. And really sort of bare minimum, right? So they're not, it's very hard to tell that they have any relationship to a thrown piece, right? And so then I started seeing, so I'm seeing those pieces, and I'm thinking about how, I mean, I had a bunch of them in the studio, that I almost, if I wasn't working towards this, I would have started to build more three-dimensionally, right? So I guess that might be, yeah. So I'm kind of curious. So I started to see these as sort of more three-dimensional, even though I knew they were going to be up on the wall. So as other, right, so thinking about other ways that I could use sort of similar parts. Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe the
Yeah.
final one. I'm struck as I'm sitting here tonight by the shadows.
Mm-hmm.
Was that part of your thinking and your sort of planfulness as you put this together?
Right, so, whenever I've done wall pieces, I've known the shadows have been really very important. The very first piece that I did, there was a wall piece, 100 saucers, that was in the Warm Gallery. This was right after graduate school, so in like 1987, something like that. A raw, very, very raw porcelain. It was very rough, didn't look like porcelain. Some people thought it looked like plaster. And we put it up, and then all of a sudden, and it's just white on white shadows. And it was like, whoa, right. And so this piece, using the black crackle on it, that again was, it felt like a big, scary step to make, right? Because they were all white first off, right? And it was like, okay, this is working when it's white. It's like, but I really wanted this piece to be different. And then thinking about how the shadows might work with this, one of the things that I'm noticing is that in some areas, it almost, the shadow and the piece, there's all, that line of difference is so slight. And so that's a really intriguing area as well to be thinking about. How can I use that? And how can I do more with that? And then in the other gallery, there's a set of trays that are up on a red rectangle wall. And someone pointed out the shadows there and what was happening, and that they were, kind of generously telling me that, you're starting to play with color here now too. I'm like, okay, maybe. But that idea of maybe working with the shadows in a different way, right? Yeah.
To
Yeah.
continue that,
Yes.
did you and Lise
Mm-hmm.
play around then with the light angles of the lights, or did you? This is what's here and there. Which was it? Did you go? Oh, let's change. Let's focus this direction and see how this looks.
Oh yeah, all of the above. Yes, many different kind of, because you could put the light straight on it and it's just sort of dead, and then there's a point where it just sort of comes to life. And I really wanted the shadows, right, and then trying to make it so that the lights were not going to be in everybody's face too.
Right.
That's consideration.
Balancing the light on your dad's work too. Like there's kind
Right.
of a softness
Right.
to this room that
Yeah.
the lighting, I think, is a big part of.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So I think in the introduction you mentioned the concept of a flock of starlings. And when I look at this, I see different things from nature. I'm wondering how much of that I see mollusks in the sand, I see butterflies, I see fish,
Yeah.
I see birds flying. And is any of that intentional or just in my mind?
Shells.
Right. So there's a point, let's see, on this wall, so this is what I started with this piece. So that if you look at this piece and then you look at what's out in the hallway, you can see a connection. And I started sort of working out, right? Once I started, let's see, I got really excited because like, oh, look at, this is really different. And I have to back up to see it. Like this piece and then these pieces here. There's another piece I'm trying to find here, but these all of a sudden, this started looking like wings, right? So, yes, so I thought, okay, these kind of look like wings. There's sort of movement. But I think one of the things that I found is that I try not to think too much about those things. I don't want them to look so much like one specific thing. I love it that people see so many different things, right? And that it's something that, even coming in here, I'm noticing things that I'd never seen before. And that, for me, is a sign that, things are working with this. Because otherwise it's just sort of, if it's, it's going to be more interesting to me. But, there's curves of nature. Yeah, there's always been sort of that line in my work. Yeah.
And there are pieces in the other gallery that are named after natural phenomena.
Right.
Too.
Right.
Like
Right. Yeah.
There are visual associations.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And those, and it's like those names kind of come after, right.
Yeah.
But to the fact, the fact that murmuration kind of came about earlier on in the piece too is different. So.
Probably have time for one more question.
I just wondered if you thought about, I really liked when you were describing how you thought about murmuration, when you looked it up, that it's a disturbance or it's a sound or like murmuring. And I just wondered if you thought at all about there being a dialogue between your pieces and your dad's in the gallery as they're kind of...
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely, because I think I see both galleries as having these conversations, right? And kind of reflecting. They're both galleries are a result of reflecting on his work, right, and my work, and what I'm doing, and what he did, and what I've done. But I see very much these conversations, right, between different parts, even.
Even pieces, it seems to me like pieces of his are popping out, interacting with pieces of yours.
Yeah. Well, good. I'm glad you see that.
Posthumously, you can still be having this conversation with your dad.
Yeah. In some ways, this is the most recent conversation with him, right? Yeah. So I feel very lucky to be able to do that.
Well, that feels like such a nice poetic way to end our
There we
artist
go.
talk. I do want to mention a couple of things though before we close tonight's event. So a few things. A week from today, we're having another event actually. It will be a very short. We're going to do a film screening. It's a 5-minute film by Mike Hazard called The Painted Eye, which is about your dad's painting process. And then you're going to be facilitating discussion with two folks, Sally Johnson at Groveland Gallery and Mary Abbey, who's the former art critic at the Star Tribune. And they're going to be talking about Jerry's career and legacy. We figured since Jerry obviously can't give an artist talk, this might be the next best thing to do. So I hope you'll be free a week from tonight, same time, 6:30. Let's hope there's no snow and
Right.
maybe it feels more like spring outside. Yeah, you will also be in the galleries on Sundays,
Yep.
right?
Yep,
The
2
next
more
2
Sundays.
from 2 to 4.
Mhm.
So you'll be here. And I do want to make sure, Monica already mentioned this, but as you're looking around tonight, don't miss the second floor gallery, which is a beautiful exhibition curated by Sophia Gibson, who's right there. One of Monica's student assistants, and it's Jerry's heads and portrait work, and it's just really fantastic. It's a really nice nod, I think, to Monica's mentorship, but also I never miss a chance to brag about our students here. So, so make
Yeah.
sure you see that. But please do hang around, have some cookies, have some bubbly water, spend a little time with Monica. Thank you all so much for coming tonight.
Yeah, thank you.